my pleasure to welcome Dr. Duncan Macinnis, who's the New South Wales representative of MTPConnect, Director of Stakeholder Engagement. And I've asked him to talk today about what it means to grow the active medtech industry. And MTPConnect, as many of you will know, is the official government sponsored growth centre charged with driving this particular industry. So we're going to be hearing today from Duncan about what MTPConnect is up to, and then open it up to a broader discussion about what we think we can do in this particular niche of ours in active medtech. So that, I'd like to hand over to Duncan.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks very much for the invite to come and talk today. It's a real honour, and I think we met in my first week as Director of Stakeholder Engagement back in January last year. It's been a bit of a changing period since then, but yeah, you introduced the community to me then, and so it's fantastic to be able to present today. As Tim said, I'm going to go over sort of who MTPConnect are, what we do, what we've been able to achieve since we were set up in 2015, and then talk about some of the opportunities for people to engage with our programs and projects and partners. And then we're going to move on to some thoughts on how we can grow the active medtech industry. So before I get into who MTPConnect are, I just want to give you a snapshot of what it is. So MTPConnect is the industry growth centre for medtech, pharma, biotech and digital health in Australia, which is Australia's 8th largest export segment as of 2019. Supports somewhere in the order of 70,000 skilled jobs, exports in the order of sort of 8.2 billion per year, something in the order of closer to 1,900 clinical trials run in Australia each year, which contributes approximately 1.4 billion. And obviously the sector has been front and centre in our response and dealing with COVID-19, not just in Australia, but overseas as well. So MTPConnect, as I said, is the industry growth centre for medtech, pharma, biotech and digital health. So we're one of 6 industry growth centres. All of us are funded, in part at least, by the Federal Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources. But we're all independent, not-for-profit companies distinct from government. The different growth centres work in different ways, but we all sort of work at this nexus of academia, industry and government. So when we talk about the stakeholder engagement team and the people we deal with, it includes companies, academic researchers, the industry associations, governments, both state, federal and at times local, the universities and medical research institutes, various investors and the regulatory bodies like the TGA. When we draw the fence around what we deal with, we tend to sort of say it's products that are regulated by groups like the TGA and FDA. So the relevance of that is not animal health, which is obviously regulated by the APVMA in Australia. And we tend not to get quite so involved in complementary medicines. Digital health is a little bit of a grey area there, in that a lot of the companies working in that space aren't regulated. But that's the general sort of gist of where we draw our boundaries. As an industry growth centre, we have 4 key goals in everything that we do. And those are increasing collaboration and commercialisation across the sector, helping improve management and workforce skills, helping improve access to the global supply chain and international markets, and doing work to optimise the regulatory environment relevant to the sector. In terms of our work as the stakeholder engagement team, which has changed a little bit over the years. So previously we had one general manager who looked after the entire country, Alfredo Martinez-Cole, who many of you probably know. As of about October 2019-ish, the model of stakeholder engagement changed a bit, and we've moved to a state-based model. So I'm based in Sydney, look after New South Wales and ACT. I have a colleague, Andrew Boskill, who is up in Brisbane, looks after Queensland. Another colleague, Tracy Wilkinson, over in Perth, who looks after WA. And Beck Tunstall is the Senior Director who leads the stakeholder engagement team and looks after Victoria, South Australia and Tasmania. In terms of the work that we do as a stakeholder engagement team, a lot of it is focused on this increasing collaboration and commercialisation piece. And in terms of what we do there, it includes things like getting involved with CRCP, CRC grants, both in terms of helping put them together and reviewing them on behalf of Oz Industry. A similar role with the Australian Research Council Industrial Transformation Scheme, although as of this year, the growth centres won't be reviewing those anymore, but there is still a strong expectation that we will assist in putting them together in terms of ensuring they align with our strategic priorities and that kind of thing. But I find that my work as a stakeholder engagement director, a lot of it is just helping build connections across the sector, putting people in contact with, people like Tim, helping researchers find companies they might want to work with. Recently, a CRC came to me and said, look, we need to find some people who are interested in the critical supply chain for manufacture of medical products. And I was able to sort of open up my network to them. In terms of the work that we do...
If I just give you a bit of an endorsement there, Duncan, because you mentioned we did meet in the first week of your job, and that was in the context of the CRCP project application, which Genesis was ultimately successful in getting in the cell and gene therapy space, a project that we did in partnership with UNSW and CSL. So, and I remember at the time, it was your first week, and you did give us some good feedback, and I imagine your experience in that has grown since then. And then you just mentioned that that sector across the pharmaceutical supply chain. Again, that's something that we've actually subscribed to, that bid that's currently underway. So they're two good examples of you giving the company I work for, Genesis, some very specific help. And I imagine that must be multiplied by 100 times across all the different companies that you know.
Absolutely, yeah. It was a very interesting meeting that first week, Tim. I sort of walked out of that meeting and thought, I'm going to remember this meeting for a long time to come. But yeah, thank you for the kind words.
So if what I'm leading to that, if you are not already in personal contact with Duncan at the end of this presentation, make sure you do get in contact with him because he's very generous with his time and introductions, which are very, very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tim. I'm very active on LinkedIn too. In terms of what we do around improved management and workforce skills, a lot of the work that we're doing there is through our READY program, which I'm going to talk about more later. In terms of some examples of things that we do to improve access to the global supply chain, prior to COVID-19, a lot of what we were doing was supporting ingoing and outgoing delegations. So in particular, big MedTech conferences around this time that were run in Canada for a number of years, we'd sent delegations. Last year, we did a virtual delegation to that conference and found that it probably wasn't giving the value that we were after, but we're still very heavily involved in helping connect people with overseas groups, work closely with Austrade and the various state bodies that help companies move overseas or that assist people who want to come into Australia. In terms of optimising the regulatory environment, we're also very active in sort of putting out white papers around various topics. Probably most recently was our antimicrobial resistance paper. And we've done things in terms of regulation for digital health and a number of other things. Projects around frugal innovation for India, for example, and the digital health opportunity in Indonesia also fall under those two headings of access to the global supply chain and optimizing the regulatory environment. So in terms of how we achieve those goals, we do it through strategic deployment of funding into the sector. So at the moment, MTPConnect operates 5 distinct business units. And they are, first of all, the funding that we receive from the Department from DISA, the Federal Department of Industry. We're different from the other industry growth centres in that we also administer about $160 million worth of MRFF funding across 4 programs. So let me first talk about what we've been able to do with the DISA funding. There was 15.6 million given to us to support projects across the sector. We were able to support 40 projects in total. That funding is now all fully committed. I think that the last project that we supported was either the setting up of the AAMRnet, which is an Australian antimicrobial resistance network, led specifically by industry to give industry a voice at the table. And we've also recently set up a program with the Australian Cardiovascular Alliance and also the Victor Chang Cardiac Research Institute and the CPC at the University of Sydney to help support and nurture first-in-human cardiovascular device trials. So if you're working in that space, highly recommend checking them out because some of the clinicians they're working with are very literally world-class clinicians, including people like Gemma Figtree from Royal North Shore Hospital and Jason Kovacic, who is the director at Victor Chang. The other programs that we run, the Biomedtech Horizons program is $45 million to support commercialization of early stage medtech programs. We currently support 41 projects and we're about to announce the commitment of the final money there. So it will be approximately for 45 projects, I think, in total supported, many of whom are operating in the active medtech space.
Duncan, can I just ask, you mentioned those first two, that the money for those is either fully committed or nearly fully committed. I would imagine that over time, there'll be a new tranche of money coming towards MTPConnect. Is that something we can expect? Or is this not the end of funding for medical devices via you guys in Australia, is it?
It's a good question, Tim. So all of these programs, all of these programs are competitive programs. So we've put in a bid under the MRFF and we have received these. Earlier this year, the MRFF put out a call for groups to run new programs like these programs. So there were 4 streams, one focused on preclinical medtech and therapeutics, one focused on clinical stage therapeutics, one focused on clinical stage medical devices, and one focused on digital health. The outcome of those were announced relatively recently. So Brandon Capital will be running the first 2 streams. MTPConnect was awarded the clinical stage medical device program, and Health were awarded the digital health program. So And Health are currently calling for submissions in their And Health Plus program. So if you're working in the sort of the digital health software as a medical device, although they have a pretty broad definition of digital health. So I think it includes things like wearables. So that would be relevant. They're calling for people now. The other programs, as I understand it, there are still some details to be ironed out with the Department of Health.
Right. So these programs will finish and transition to those other ones you just mentioned. Yeah.
That's right. Yep.
So And Health is running webinars right now. In fact, they ran one at 9 o'clock this morning, which I was watching when an earthquake struck Melbourne. If you haven't heard, breaking news, there was a magnitude 6.0 earthquake just in the Dandenong Ranges, just outside of Melbourne. I was right in the middle of this webinar, and the presenter nearly jumped out of her chair, I have to say. So it was quite an exciting time. But they are running one more webinar, I believe, in the next week or two. So you should go to the And Health website if you want to get onto that last webinar.
Absolutely, and I would say that And Health is a fantastic group. The work they do is really good. I think that program is going to be really exciting. They do also offer other opportunities to engage with them, some supported by us. But if you're working in that space, I would highly recommend taking advantage of their, I think it's their office hours program, where you can talk to one of the people from And Health. Very well connected, really valuable use of your time if you're working in the digital health space. The second program that we run is the Biomedical Translation Bridge program. Again, all of the funding is committed there. We're supporting 21 programs in collaboration with 3 program partners. So that is run with UniQuest out of Queensland, BioCurate out of Melbourne and the Medical Devices Partnering Program. While the BMTH program was very specifically medtech only, the BTB was a lot broader in that it included various therapeutics, digital health interventions, and others. We ran a COVID-19 specific round there, where companies like Star Pharma out of Melbourne and one of the universities who were developing a hood were successful, and other groups like SpeedX, who people in New South Wales may know well. And we were really successful. And I think the interesting thing about that was it was a very quick turnaround time from the Department of Health saying, we want you to do this, to having it up and running. So Lauren Kelly, who now runs the Targeted Translation Research Accelerator program, is very impressive, the work that she was able to do there. I'm going to skip over READY quickly and move to the TTRA. This was a program that was awarded to us late last year, I think. It's $47 million to do work around translating research that benefits people with diabetes and cardiovascular disease, with a focus on sort of people that have both. That money is essentially split evenly between setting up 2 independent research centres, so one for cardiovascular disease, one for diabetes, and the other half of the money is being used for annual funding rounds for research projects. Again, we're doing that program in collaboration with a number of partners, including And Health, UniQuest, and the Medical Devices Partnering Program. And we expect the research centres to be announced any day now, and the outcomes for the first round of project funding also to be announced.
Duncan, can I ask you why diabetes and cardiovascular amongst all the range of potential diseases? Have they been picked out particularly because they're seen as big issues, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was a call that was put out by the MRFF. So it was their decision to choose diabetes and cardiovascular disease, and there's a fairly specific focus there on complications of diabetes and cardiovascular disease as well. But I think in terms of just the chronic burden and in terms of the importance of those diseases over the coming decades, I think that was why they were chosen in particular.
Yeah.
The other thing that I would point out for people working in the space of cardiovascular disease and diabetes is that we expect the second call for EOIs to also be opening quite imminently. So one to keep an eye on. The final program that we run, which I think is going to be really relevant for people on this call, is the READY program. It's kind of difficult to get your head around just how much stuff is being done through READY. I'm going to talk a bit more about that later. So just a quick overview. We're doing that with sort of at least 9 program partners. It's all around building workforce skills. There are a number of programs that have run. There is support for existing programs like the Medical Devices Partnering Program, the Bridge Tech Program, the Health 10X Program that Tim mentioned earlier. But I'm going to talk more about that later, so I'll come back to that. One of the major things that we do, and one of a really good place to find information about the sector, particularly if you're looking at putting in a CRCP grant or something like that, is our sector competitiveness plan. This is something that gets updated sort of regularly, not quite annually, but on a very regular basis. And the most recent one is from April 2020, obviously sort of about the time that COVID-19 was really starting to bite. Last year was when this was released. And some of the things that we do in that is identify the megatrends. That the whole purpose of the sector competitiveness plan is to put a roadmap on how we can build the sector over the coming decades. So one of the first things we do is identify the trends that are driving change in the sector. And this is the sector as a whole, so not just active medtech, but obviously these are all really, really applicable to people working in the active medtech space.
Yes, I would say that active medtech could apply in any of these areas.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, I mean, the central mega trend is the digital evolution, which is obviously driving changes in huge and varied ways. And a lot of what we're seeing in terms of the impact of COVID-19, in terms of uptake of telehealth and a move towards sort of hospital in the home type ideas, all really relevant to active medtech. Digital evolution is also sort of fairly central in the personalized medicine space and genomics and understanding exactly how to get the right drug to the right person at the right time. Other sort of relevant things that are sort of worth noting, as I said, the chronic burden, a lot of what we're seeing in terms of new developments of people, aged care is an area where we're seeing a lot of innovation, particularly in that sort of digital health wearables overlap and sort of understanding how we can better manage people getting older. I think that sort of tightly sort of links with healthy aging. Again, one of those sort of big, probably a bit more central than we're seeing in this diagram, is the move away from treating people who are sick and that move towards prevention of illness. And I think that sort of ties in with healthy aging. Global biosecurity is an interesting one, and developing markets. We've developed a couple of, put out a few really sort of interesting papers around the opportunity for frugal innovation in India specifically, and the digital health opportunity in Indonesia. I think people often think about those kinds of markets as not the place to start, but we're seeing increasingly, and particularly sort of people who are taking part in the Health 10X, obviously, because that's their focus, seeing people with those markets as ones that they start out with. A couple of really interesting state-based programs that the New South Wales government has run in terms of helping people access India as a market, and a lot of work being done at the moment by Austrade to update their India strategy. So I think India in particular is an area that gives us some real opportunities.
Duncan, do you see these developing markets purely as sort of markets to sell your products into, or do you see them as a collaborative opportunity for joint development of products? Because India has, a very sophisticated technology base.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are lots of different ways to sort of look at India. Some companies that we see sort of very specifically set up developing products for sort of lower resourced environments. So whether that could be an assisted heart device or dialysis type stuff. Some of them are very specifically sort of developing their businesses based around that low resource. Others are seeing India as as you said, highly developed, very sophisticated healthcare model, because India really is the full gamut, sort of very high tech, really sort of leading edge hospitals through to the very lowest resources. So there is a big opportunity there. And the other thing that I think is interesting about countries like India and Indonesia in particular is the quality of their mobile networks. That they may not have good landlines, but the people in India who have, in Indonesia rather, who have 4G phones, I think there's a really interesting opportunity there to exploit that.
Okay.
The next,
just before you go on, you can just go back to the next slide. I noticed, earlier we talked about diabetes and cardiovascular, which I take it are sort of sub-elements of the chronic burden. When I looked at this online, this area, you've got in your sector strategy document a couple of paragraphs on each of these areas just to describe what they are. If a company was looking to sort of really do some market research and get some more, I guess, reliable data and figures in each of these areas. You know, what percentage of the population has diabetes, etc. Is there any resource that MTPConnect has this initial work was done? I imagine to create this megatrends map, you would have done quite a bit of analysis of markets. Is the raw data that led to this map you've got in front of you, is that available at all?
It's an interesting question, Tim. I'd have to take that on notice. We tend to putting together the sector competitiveness plan is a very, very large piece of work, and we work with consultants to help put this together. So I wouldn't be able to tell you off the top of my head whether that's data that we own. I would suspect so, but I couldn't say for certain. In terms of that kind of work, probably there are some consultants out there who would be able to help you with that. But in terms of answering whether that data is available and something that we can share, not 100% certain.
Okay, thank you.
The other thing that we talk about in our sector competitiveness plan is our sector strategic priorities. These are really important when we're talking to you about CRCPs, CRCs, industrial transformation type things. What we're really looking for first and foremost is alignment with these. So the priorities that we have, there are 7 priorities that have changed over time. I believe a few have been added. Again, these are all going to be relatively relevant to the active medtech industry. So we talk about aligning investment in the knowledge priorities, and I'm going to show you those next so that we can meet current and future market needs. We talk about creating a highly productive commercialization environment. And I think that's a lot of what we've been able to do with the BMTH and the BTB and other programs, and even Ready, where we're sort of helping support training programs, has been sort of quite successful in terms of that. We hear people talk a lot about how Australian companies tend to sell IP early, how we're not building the next Cochlear and ResMed. So that piece of helping build SMEs to help small companies become medium companies become larger companies, and not just shipping IP offshore is what we're talking about in priority 3. Strengthening Australia as an attractive clinical trials destination. We have been doing, again, a lot of work in that space, helping work with Austrade to sort of produce outward-facing documentation about why you might want to do clinical trials in Australia. And there really are a lot of reasons from an international perspective on why you would want to do them here, particularly up until relatively recently, when Australia's ability to deal with COVID-19 had been so spectacularly successful. Obviously, highly relevant to the active medtech space is support of development of digital healthcare solutions, devices, and data analytics. And we're going to talk more about some of the sort of skills, experience, and capability gaps there later. We want to help position Australia as a preferred partner for international markets, and we want to support advanced manufacturing as part of the broader Australian innovation system. And that's something that's obviously been sort of really a big emphasis of the federal government over the last few months. So I'm not going to read through all of these sector knowledge priorities, but you'll see that in particular in the device and diagnostic area, there's a lot of stuff that's obviously really relevant to people working in this space. And if you're interested in more of those, I'd recommend having a look at the sector competitiveness plan. As I said, we're very active in terms of publications. Included this slide so I don't get in trouble with our comms team. There's a lot of really interesting work there. And particularly, as I sort of mentioned, the frugal innovation in India and digital health in Indonesia. So I want to talk now quickly about the Ready initiative and its relevance to this community and how people can engage with that. So the Ready initiative, as I said earlier, is a $32 million program. Essentially, there are 3 pillars. Pillar 1 is expansion of proven programs. That includes the Ant Health program, supporting them, a GSK internship program, the Medical Devices Partnering Program out of Adelaide, very relevant to this audience, the MedTech Actuator, programs like the Bridge and Bridge Tech. Again, Bridge Tech, very relevant to this audience. And I see they've just opened their call for people that might want to be involved in that. The Bridge Tech program is a sort of Australia-wide program around teaching people about commercialisation of therapeutics in case of the Bridge program, and medical devices in terms of Bridge Tech. It's an excellent program in terms of both what you learn and also the people that you meet. I did both Bridge and Bridge Tech before joining MTPConnect and highly recommend them. The second pillar is around a comprehensive skills gap analysis, which I'm going to talk about a bit next. There is also funding as in part of that stream for various groups to put forward solutions to the identified skills gaps. At the moment, we're running ARCs are running a program around designing clinical trials so that they satisfy both regulatory requirements but also requirements of payers. So we want people to be able to sort of design a trial to show that yes, their device is safe and efficacious, but also that it's valuable from a health economics perspective as well. The Biointellect Consortium, so it's Biointellect and ARCs and a few others, are running a program around accessing funding. Cicada have run their New South Wales program around understanding clinical need, which was very highly rated. If you're dialing in from one of the other states, I would highly recommend checking out their program, which they'll be running in each of the other major states, and obviously in under current situation being done virtually. But the feedback we've had from that program is just fantastic. And finally, CF Pharma are running a program for us around quality management systems, and that includes a free online primer that covers GLP, ISO 9001, ISO 13485, and then paid 4-day deep dives into each of those topics. So if you're interested in any of those programs are very highly subsidised. You get 4 days for about $400, which would usually cost you well in excess of $1,500. The New South Wales programs will be run, I think, late November, early December. And I saw Tim put a mention of those on the first slide. So thanks for that, Tim. We'd really love to get as many people doing those as possible. So if you're an academic and you have students who might want to get involved, please help spread the word. The final pillar of Ready, which I'm noting the time is going quite quickly, is around helping place people into internships and fellowships. So working with APR Intern, internships also as part of the Bridge and Bridge Tech program, so alumni of that can access special internship funding, and the MTPConnect Ready Fellowship program. It's a really quite exciting program where companies can come to us and say, we would like to second an academic or clinical researcher into our business to work on a commercialization project for a period of 6 to 12 months. And we can pay their salary and on costs for that period. And the purpose of that is not to try and lure people out of academia, but to give academic and clinical researchers an understanding of what it is like to work in industry. So I'm going to move now to this question that Tim posed around how we can grow the active medtech industry, and just sort of put forward a few conversation starters. So as I mentioned, the part of Ready was this comprehensive skills gap analysis where we spoke very broadly across to stakeholders across the entire sector. So medtech, biotech, big pharma, big medtech, startups, people working in tech transfer, groups like Cicada, obviously, to understand where the gaps were and what could be done to address those gaps. I think that the total list of skills gaps that were identified were in excess of 100. And we've gone to develop, to sort of select 20 of the most important of those. In undertaking this analysis, we saw that some skills gaps can be closed through training programs. They're a capability gap, but others need experience to close the gaps, and others are capacity in terms of we just don't have enough people with those skills. I think, and I'd welcome comments on this, but I think that almost all of the capability gaps are relevant to this audience. very much understanding of QMS. And Tim, I think we've had quite a few conversations about various projects that come to you with sort of, they've gone quite a long way along the pathway and haven't really considered what they need to do in terms of QMS. Definitely shortage of MTP specific project managers. I think there are a lot of people with generic project management experience, but maybe not quite so much understanding of how the clinical side of things interfaces with that. Definitely design of clinical trials to satisfy payer needs. I think, as we sort of said, the central mega trend is the digital evolution, and I think that really means that cybersecurity is an area where we really need to be very strong. I think probably Australia-wide across all sectors, there's a lack of understanding to a degree about best practice management in cybersecurity, but probably even more so in our sector. Definitely understanding of big data capture and how you can actually make sense and use that. Design and use of AI within MTP, within the sector, related to number 10, definitely, I think. Awareness of regulatory requirements, particularly amongst startups and SMEs. Again, understanding what they need to do to be able to get products on the market. And that was something that we really saw around about this time last year, where there was the huge push to try and upskill, sort of pivot to companies making medical device type stuff. Definitely around identifying unmet market need and understanding that clinical need is not necessarily the same as a commercial opportunity. The ability to secure investment, again, I think sort of understanding how you go about doing that, understanding what people you talk to when, and what opportunities are available in terms of grants. And I would recommend, if you haven't already seen Tim's article recently that he did for CircuitWise on what opportunities exist, I'd recommend checking that out. And then this identification of payer and understanding reimbursement pathways, which sort of links into that identifying unmet market need. If you can't understand clearly who's going to pay for what you're doing, then you have to really think about whether what you have is a commercial opportunity. So I think those are all relevant. Possibly, I think there are a lot, particularly maybe the first two of those experience gaps. We're not going to be able to build a bigger sector without people who are experienced in the manufacturing side of things. I think that there's an interesting handbrake there on growth, maybe in terms of just the size of the Australian industry, in terms of active medtech, in terms of people who can do, say, manufacture something like a high-end smartphone. There basically isn't anyone, as I understand it.
Duncan, I just want to open this up to the audience, because this is a really important slide, I think, and I've got so many questions jumping out at me about what the issues that you're raising here, and I'm sure that the audience is as well. So just encourage people to start typing in your thoughts and questions into the Q&A icon, or raise your hand if you want to contribute to this discussion. But I'll just start it, Duncan, by endorsing the observation I would make is that any one of these 20 areas is a huge field in its own right. If you look at the quality management system, which to be honest is bread and butter, you can't have a medical device without an ISO 13485 quality management system. And there is oodles and oodles of free online resources and webinars and so forth around the topic. And yet it's difficult to get your head around, because it's a simple document. You read through the standard, but then implementing that is, there's a lot of complexity and a lot of work involved to really get your head around and understand it. If you translate that across all 100 topics that you mentioned earlier, it's simply beyond the capability of any one person to get their head around, all of the different, subjects. So what it really raises for me is a subject that's actually dear to my heart, is the idea of institutional, organizational knowledge. If no one person can understand them all, then obviously it's all about developing teams that do have expertise across all of these areas. And as a sector, we've got consultants in every one of these areas who are incredibly expert in each one of these areas. But that doesn't necessarily mean that product developers understand the value of those service providers and are prepared to pay for them. So it's extremely complex. It's more than just listing what they are and saying, let's do something about it. And it's great that you are, and you're raising awareness about it, but it's a very complex set of interrelationships in order to, as you say, grow the industry and sort of make, getting all these things working together so that we start getting more successful, startups going to medium-sized companies, as you said, and medium going to big companies. So it's very challenging.
Absolutely. Yeah, look, there are things that we can do. There are levers that we can pull. And in terms of addressing some of these capability gaps, that's obviously where we are doing the courses, and the courses that we have put forward so far are aimed at addressing those. The other programs, when we talk about internships and fellowships, those are the ones that are intended to try and address these experience gaps. And you talk about the fact that, no organization is going to have one person who's across everything. But this number 15 there, the shortage of industry professionals with end-to-end translation and commercialization experience, those people who aren't necessarily experts at everything, but they know enough about the science to talk to the scientists. They know enough about the legal to talk to the lawyers. They know enough about the commercialization pathway to talk the business case. That's what we're trying to build as well through those internships and the fellowships. But yes, it's obviously there's a lot to be done. It was interesting how many conversations we had in putting together this report. People really sort of pulling out other issues where there are levers that we can't pull, that we don't have an ability to change things, and just sort of really sort of those 100 that were pulled out were the ones that were sort of culled as ones where potentially we could do something about them in some way. But yes, very much concede that it's a long game.
Yeah, and if you take that example at number 15, you're talking about end to end, and then you look at the active medtech sector, which in addition to those capabilities you mentioned, also have the ability to understand, embedded electronics, the intricacies of software as a medical device, cybersecurity, and so forth. Being conversant in those as well as, because we get a lot of people from the pharma sector, so they don't necessarily understand the challenges in the active medtech space, which is what this community is all about. It's an even smaller pool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on, in terms of that capacity and people who can do that kind of work, and whether that is a constraint. I mean, as an example, in people in digital health, we often hear about, the really good people often want to go to work in fintech where they can earn a lot more money and do something a bit more sexy. And I wonder whether, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, they've got options. Those are broadly needed skills. And I'd be interested to hear whether there are enough people too.
That's an even bigger challenge, because you get plenty of engineers who end up in the finance industry as well. So there are, the number of engineers who stay within a purely technical stream is quite is a percentage of that. I tend to find that those who do stay, and certainly the people that we have at Genesis, they tend to be passionate about. They're quite creative people. They're quite passionate about creating devices that can make a difference. So very similar in the environmental space as well. You get a lot of engineers who are passionate about saving the world, so to speak. And so you get that sort of, you do get that passion amongst those people. And to a certain extent, what makes a good engineer is somebody who's very narrowly focused on what they do, and they excel at a particular aspect of engineering, but that doesn't necessarily translate them to having that broad big picture view. that's needed. So you know, there's a huge variety of, you know, it comes down to personality types and characteristics of individuals who are sort of amenable to working across all of these spaces and understanding how the technical side of things relates to the business side of things, and the entrepreneurial spirit that's needed to bring these products to life. So yeah, it's very complex.
Absolutely. And I think that takes me quite nicely to the next area in terms of funding. You know, if we can build the sector, there's more opportunities for people to stay. That, you know, there's people, the opportunities to potentially, you know, get paid more and all of that sort of thing. So these are, again, just some conversation starters in terms of what we could do to help build the sector. The first would be grants for earlier stage riskier work. So, I mean, we look at things like the BMTH, our BTB, the New South Wales Medical Devices Funds, fantastic programs. We're supporting lots and lots of programs in the active medtech space, but there's still this requirement for those kinds of grants, even though they're sort of early stage, that generally you want to see some kind of clinical validation. And there are so many projects out there that need some funding to sort of get to that stage where they're going to be competitive for New South Wales MDF or any of those other kinds of grants. There's some good schemes in New South Wales, like the MVP grant and the expanded tech voucher program, that do address this to some extent. The MVP grant funding is relatively limited though, and the tech voucher program does require that sort of expenditure to already have been demonstrated, which is going to rule out a lot of people here. If you do that, if you have more people moving from sort of, you know, good idea to prototype to some sort of clinical validation, to keep growing, you need more capital to support that next stage. With things like our BMTH grant, they're already incredibly competitive. The CRCP scheme, incredibly competitive. Those kinds of grants, there are lots of projects, and there's a spectrum of quality, but there's already people, lots that want to go there. I think what we really need to see is more venture capital with an understanding of the space. It's certainly getting better, but we still hear a lot of people who talk about, you know, how quickly overseas investors move and how much more money there is overseas. So I think it would be fantastic to see more VC with an understanding of the space. Definitely COVID is opening people's eyes to the opportunity and sort of the success of groups working in the diagnostic space in particular. I think has really sort of been a bit of a wake-up call to some people, but definitely need more there. And finally, this idea of the purchases, as in the various health systems buying local, which is complex, definitely. And Australia will always be a small market, and Australian companies have to be global from day one. But we've seen this recent push from the federal government around local manufacturing. And of course, COVID's shown just how complex some of these supply chains are. I was talking to George Sidis from IDE the other day in his capacity as chair of the MTAA Manufacturing Working Group. He sort of pointed out that a lot of Australian manufacturers who bid for work against manufacturers in Germany, Japan, US, they're not unsuccessful because of price, but because of geography. If your market is in Europe, Asia, North America, what's the reason to make your product here? At the same time, manufacturing sticky. So if you can make Australia attractive as a first market, if you can do something to encourage people to start making here, at least in some capacity, then that's going to be really valuable in terms of growing the industry because more activity in Australia is what's key. It's going to help address some of those capability and experience gaps, and it provides competition for existing providers. And I'd really love to see the NDIS in particular leveraged into something that can be used to help build the sector. So with that, I'd like to stop sharing and throw to some of the questions.
Well, if you just go to the next slide, actually, you've got your contacts. So I'll put your contacts up there and my contacts again. So again, if you could ask some questions and answers via the channel. There is a couple of questions here. One from Tiana asking, how can you find out more about the internships with Ready?
Yep, good question. So there's some information on the website which I can share with you to share with the network if that would be helpful, Tim. The timelines for those, the next round will close. Well, the next group of applications will be looked at in November. So it's a really good time to be thinking about it. The applications are submitted by the industry partner, not the researcher. So, Tiana, if you're an academic researcher, you need to have a partner. We're generally looking for a partner with sort of 20 plus full-time employees. And it's specifically, it's got to be about the project too. So it's got to make sense having the researcher on the project. There needs to be value for both the researcher and the company who's hosting the intern.
Yeah, and that's the Google Ready, I imagine, REDI, and you'll find the application process on the MTPConnect website somewhere.
Should pop up, yep.
Yeah. Luke, I guess, is revisiting and reinforcing a point that you made. He says, I have read the skill gap analysis before, and something that took my attention is how other industries, e.g. consulting, fintech, are more attractive employers, e.g. in terms of salary and career growth, in the Australian medtech or advanced manufacturing industries. Are there any initiatives underway to sort of change that, or any comment about how we could change that issue?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the foundational principle of the industry growth centres is to help grow the sectors. In terms of making, things about salary and that kind of thing, what we need is competitive. We need to be competitive, and we need to do that. We need size. So a lot of the work that we're doing is around helping grow the industry, build more successful companies that stay here longer and do more of their work here. And that's the kind of opportunity that's going to help make it more attractive. Again, I think the work that we can do in the policy and regulatory space to make it less difficult to do healthcare innovation is also valuable. Like, I think there are a lot of companies that sort of try and start out with this and then just find it essentially too difficult from a complexity point of view. So helping people understand the regulatory pathway, helping streamline those pathways is all relevant there. It's always going to be a problem that things like fintech are going to pay better. I can't see a world in that we grow medtech and active medtech sufficiently that they're going to be able to pay fintech type salaries to everyone. So there will always be that problem. But as Tim said, there are other things that you get out of working in this space in terms of making a difference to people's lives that you just don't necessarily get from fintech or consulting. Yeah.
Excellent. I'm just going to do something I haven't done in a long time on this website. I'm actually going to launch a quick little poll here. And I've got 2 polls. Let's see if I can get them working. So I'm hoping everyone can see on the screen there now a key question. What are the key business challenges in the active medtech product development? I've got one on technology in a minute, but you can do multi-choice. And if you could just tick the ones that you think are particularly important, perhaps maybe focus on maybe 3 or 4 of the areas. You can choose as many as you like, I think, under this model, but I'd just be interested to see that. Now, can you see the results coming up there, Duncan?
I can't see the results, no.
No, it's just me being able to see them. All right, I haven't actually done this. I'm not particularly familiar with it, but I'll just give people a minute to, fill out the answers, and we'll get a bit of an idea of what the areas are. But the questions, just while you're waiting, Duncan, is around capital, money and investment. I imagine that's going to be the number one. It's certainly looking that way now. The high cost of developing medical devices, reimbursement, winning grants, accurate market research projections, finding unbiased help and assistance, intellectual property, regulatory requirements and pathways, quality management systems. So if you're typing one of the other, clicking the other button, it'd be really great if you could type into the comment, into the chat or the Q&A, just what you meant by other. That would be really helpful. Okay, so looks like that's settling down now. I'm just going to end that poll now and share the results. So can you see on the results on the screen there now?
Yep, can see that, Tim.
I'm not exactly sure if I need to make my screen bigger, but so there you go. Have you got any comments on this, Duncan? No surprises that getting money is the number one?
Not at all. No, there's a comment from Ed in the chat about how he's had to buy a ticket to the US. You know, there's another company that you and I both know very well who've just had some success with the CRCP, who have had to really fight. They really want to stay in Australia, and they've had, you know, huge amounts of interest out of the US. They don't have any interest. They've spent some time in Silicon Valley, and they really want to do the work here, and it's been a battle. So yeah, look, there is money, and obviously, look, there are great groups, investors out there with, you know, Main Sequence Ventures, Brandon, obviously, you know, One Ventures and others working in that space. There's still not a huge amount of competition there, and it would be good to see some more people active in that sort of investment space.
Sure, I'll just read out Edmund's comment. He said, it, you know, when he was talking about the skills gaps, this one comment came up. It was, it's a negative slide, but the truth hurts. We are a risk-averse society that needs to adapt post-COVID, hence buy my ticket to the US. Sandy Law was endorsing your comments earlier about what a great bloke you are in terms of introducing you to the CRC critical supply chain. And Simon Poole, who was a previous presenter on the Starlight case study we did, he said one of his other categories was, the key for me is ensuring product/market fit, particularly with respect to secondary product design issues, e.g. user interface, ergonomics, device footprint, etc., which is an interesting particular comment. I've got a question here from Yuan Quan Yong from the University of Newcastle. We have a cohort of medical engineering students every year looking to do a one-year engineering project. Projects can be industry-driven. Is MTPConnect a platform to seek interest from medtech companies?
Yes and no. Look, we certainly try and do that kind of work where we can. It's not something where I can sort of be the, you know, go out and find the people for you, but certainly happy to make some introductions to people who might be relevant. So I'm very active with the Hunter MedTech network, very closely involved from them and have been for almost from their inception. So look, I know some of the people up in Newcastle and some of the great work that's being done. So I just recommend getting in contact with me via email would be the best place to start there.
VJ says that another category was understanding requirements that are relevant to the active medtech, especially in cybersecurity. So I think by understanding requirements, I'm assuming it means business requirements.
The TGA does have a very good document on cybersecurity requirements for medical devices available on their website. And so I'd recommend checking that out. That was put together by a team at Cyro. So I'd suggest having a look there.